This podcast represents the opinions of our hosts and guests. The content here should not be taken as medical advice and is for informational purposes only. This podcast also does not establish a standard of care, doctor-patient, or client relationship. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast or website. And because each person is so unique, all listeners are encouraged to connect with counseling and medical professionals for assistance with their personal journey. All people, places, and scenarios mentioned in the podcast have been changed to protect the privacy of those involved.
Welcome to We're Not Fine. I'm Dr. Talia Jackson.
And I'm Doug Jensen. We thank you for listening every week to our deep and thought-provoking conversations about relationships.
Welcome back, friends.
So we are back with Angela, and
Yes.
I'm going to introduce you yet again because
Fantastic.
this is episode 2
Yes.
on ethical non-monogamy, consensual non-monogamy, polyamory. I cannot wait to continue this conversation because today's topic is primarily going to be about jealousy in a way that is so critically important.
Yeah.
What a very, very complicated emotional experience that is. But I want to reiterate that you are a creative, an artist, a musician, you're learning to play the guitar, you're a psychotherapist in private practice, and you've had your own podcast on polyamory. So for
Yes.
those of you who did not see the previous episode, who jumped ahead because jealousy was your topic you wanted to talk about, because that'll happen for sure.
Will.
I am saying all of that to, and of course we are both fans of The Rock, and in the last hour I can tell you he did contact me because he watched the, sorry.
Did you see how matched
I did.
And they're already in a
Jealousy.
committed relationship.
Jealousy.
That was an easy flow.
Uh-huh.
This is what it looks like. Yep.
Yep.
But
I love it.
Talia, I have been so intrigued in wanting to hear about something that happened to you recently.
Oh, yes. You mean
You mean,
Quebec?
I mean, Quebec.
It is Quebec.
I know.
Quebec. Sometimes when you're surrounded by Minnesotans, you like to say it a Minnesotan way so that other people can understand you. But
I suppose that's true.
you should pretty often defer to seeing it the correct way, which is Quebec and Quebecois. So I had a really fun little jaunt. The first secret I've ever successfully kept in my life, my husband is turning 50, and I surprised him with a trip to Quebec. And it was so much fun, and I got away with it.
Yeah, that's craziness.
But he did start getting really suspicious at the very last minute because I said a couple things that I shouldn't have said. I said cobblestone, which I think gave some of it away. I bought some little thing at a spa, like just to reserve us a spot at the spa, which was the most miraculous spot in the world. If anyone ever wanted,
Ooh.
it was called Strom Nordique Spa,
Ooh.
and it was like this. You could be there for 8 hours going into these thermal baths, and
Ooh.
there were these infrared chairs and hammocks.
I'd like 24 hours,
It was
Same.
right?
With The Rock.
Absolute.
I had
Because
that
I
in my
forgot to
imagery.
mention he was there with me swinging on a swinging hammock.
Oh, swinging.
That's what yours, right?
Yeah.
That's clever in relationship to today's topic.
I feel like the most memorable part about this trip, other than the fact that Rob's best friend, who's Leslie's husband,
Who I adore, and I call her Goldilocks.
Yes.
Who, by the way, on a video that you gave me said Doug who.
yeah, that was a real downer for you because
I got you.
if Jay only knew that you have thought that he is a glorious specimen.
He's
right-
a glorious specimen,
right
and
behind
so
The Rock.
I expected him to say, "Oh, Doug, the
Doug!"
person that I equally think is attractive."
And we were all at a bar, and I was like,
Doug
yeah,
who?
blah, 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 look at everybody. But anyway, guess what Jay did? You'll never guess.
I do know because you told me. So
that's
say
right.
that to Angela.
Guess what Jay did?
What did Jay do?
So we showed up with Rob, or it was just Rob and I. It was really hard getting there. Air Canada, or as we now call it, Air Candida, that like Candida, cancel, delay, whatever the flight.
Yep.
We ended up having to drive from Montreal to Quebec. Anyway, long story short, we get there, and then slowly all of the friends started to arrive and surprise him.
Yeah.
And so Jay came in to the bar that we were hanging out in dressed as an old man with a really bad wig and this ridiculous beard and these even more ridiculous eyebrows. And He came in, tripped over Rob's chair on purpose. Rob picked him up and he was like, "Are you okay?" And then Rob, and I, by the way, I guess what these bazoolas did the entire 6 minutes of this charade that he was doing. I had my camera right
Oh,
here taking a video of
I'm
the
like,
entire
I was
thing.
really trying to answer that in my head, and I could not figure out what you could do with your Zumbas.
Multi-purpose.
Okay, all
They were like
right,
a shelf
okay.
in that way.
Mhm.
Anyway, it was like the best surprise ever. So it
I
was
love
six
that so
minutes. It
much.
was so cute,
Yep.
and it was really
Oh,
beautiful. And then our other friend surprised him later that day. But I would say the most interesting thing that I learned in Quebec is what a squall is. And I was
Is that
like,
a small chicken?
yes, it is.
A squab. That's a
oh,
squab.
I
I
mean,
think
right?
it's a
Yes,
quail.
yes.
So if anyone doesn't know what a squall is, and you should maybe check into that before you start packing, because I thought that 65 to 75 degrees was going to be pretty easily
I love that
translated
Yeah,
from
temperature,
here to
actually.
there.
it's the
Yeah.
perfect.
Well, with a squall,
Yep.
it was so fucking cold. We were dying. We were going to every single store in downtown Quebec, which is so beautiful. And I bought myself gloves and a scarf and a
Oh my
hat.
goodness.
And the squall is basically like wind. It's anywhere from, I don't know, 25 miles an hour. So when you're sitting outside, you have to hold on to your plate and your cup because it will most likely fly away.
I actually saw the video of you kind of spinning up in the air like a whirlwind and then
Mary
making your,
Poppins
yeah, like a Mary
style.
Poppins with no umbrella. And
It
you were
was
just like
magic.
getting ridden up there.
Oh my God, it was magic. Anyway, it was really fun.
That sounds really
I,
fun.
I recommend little weekends away and trying out surprising someone who is always the one in charge of planning trips. That was fun. I feel really
That's a
Happy
real
birthday
gift.
to Rob,
winning at
Happy
who
life.
is an
birthday.
extraordinary podcast husband to me.
He is.
Yep. Who helped us out today.
He did.
Mhm,
And as you said,
mhm.
I told him I loved him. You told him you loved
Yes.
him. And you said, I bet I would. So that's like 2.5 loves for him today.
Yes. And you
That's
were
true.
like, I'm really learning about boundaries and how not to jump into love
That's
before I'm
right.
sure.
That's right.
That's
Yeah, that
Yes.
was a
Yes.
really astute
I
observation.
think
Yeah, we
that's when I
didn't.
fell in love with you. I was
Oh.
like, that's brilliant.
It was brilliant.
Mhm.
Part two.
Part 2, and you
Part
know
two.
this topic again, it's really huge.
Mhm.
Like who hasn't experienced jealousy?
Yeah.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so I cannot wait to just let you kind of take this conversation. Of course, we as therapists have thoughts on this. We've worked with people who have jealousy, but I'm very
One or
curious.
two.
Yeah.
One or
Oh,
two
yeah,
or
a million.
5,000.
That's right.
I've
So-
had my own experiences.
Yes.
Don't love the feeling. It's awful.
It's a really awful
It's
feeling
gross.
to have. Yeah.
Like it's
And
just
of course,
icky.
Yeah.
jealousy isn't something that only happens in polyamorous relationships, right? I
No.
mean, like it happens in
Anytime.
every relationship.
Anything, and not even necessarily relationally, right? Like
I mean,
there's a million things we can
I
be
have no
jealous
problem
about.
admitting that, my first, I was married to a woman and then I came out and who was the mother of my children, love her very much. But I started dating a dude and I was not ready for all of that. And I remember somebody checking him out while he was bending over playing pool. And I walked up to the guy and I said, "That's mine." And I'm like, Jesus fucking Christ, what are you? And I'm like 25 years old.
Yeah.
And I was like,
Yeah.
I look back and I'm like, oh, ugly, ugly behavior.
But we all know that like visceral urge,
We
right? Like when
do,
you
we
said that,
do.
I felt that like in my gut,
Did you?
like in my core. That's just like, oh, like that's mine. Like
You know what's so
something
funny
comes
though?
out
All of
of
his
us.
friends were like, "That's so hot. We want a Doug." And I'm like, "Well, it's not pretty because
Well, it's complex,
It
right?
is.
I mean, we're talking about a developmental need. If we want to get therapist-y about this,
Let's
like
get there.
feeling, like that feeling of being like claimed and protected, and that's something that we actually need from our parents. The felt sense of like you belong, like you are part of us, not in like an icky controlling way,
Yep.
but in a balanced, like you have a clear sense, like this is yours, this is ours relationally together. And
Yeah.
a lot of us don't get
Oh
that.
God, that is so beautiful. And a lot of times, like that feeling comes with conditions, which is why so
Yes.
many of us end up feeling like we're not enough,
That's
or we are
right.
only. This is where like all the personality disorders develop, or
Mhm.
when we talk about like different attachment styles. If you
Mhm.
grow up thinking that I'm only worthy of love if, right, that's
Yeah.
where
Absolutely.
it all comes from.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Absolutely.
we do crave that. We do need that.
And we get really good at ultimately betraying ourselves in order to try to get those needs met. And that's something that I hear even in your response. Like,
Yeah.
it's not like in ethics, like it's not authentic to who you are necessarily
Yeah.
to be like, you're mine at that, and with that level, right? Like, that's really different than like,
You
you're
belong.
mine, like we're each other's together,
Oh,
right?
it's
And
totally
or
different.
we're playing with that in like a consensual hot sort of like power play sort of way, a
Yeah.
totally
Yeah,
different
I agree with that entirely.
experience.
That's right.
And that's actually, that exact example is a big like root of one of the main ways that jealousy shows up. It's like, because if you're not mine and somebody else is looking at your ass and likes it, then I could lose you, right? Like,
Absolutely.
that's
Yep.
the ultimate risk, right? Like, I could lose you. And that shows up in a million different ways, the way we respond to that. Like, we could be like, well, I don't care. Like, it's not a big deal anyway. Or
Right.
like with like a push away, which ultimately doesn't get us the closeness that we want. Or the like, you're mine, I'm going to claim you in a like controlling and demanding sort of way, which also doesn't get us the authentic closeness that we are ultimately looking for.
That's right.
But it's really hard in those moments when that like drive, that biological, physiological whoosh comes over us when we are having some sort of response like that. We all have that experience. We have different flavors of it, but it's there in everybody.
Yep.
And so what do we do? I mean, jealousy is the number one thing that comes up when open relationship is talked about. People will say, well, I think I would be so jealous I couldn't handle it. Or how do you deal with jealousy? Or like, if you're really evolved enough, should you not feel jealousy at all?
Such good questions.
Like,
Those are really
so
great
many
questions.
things like
Yep.
that, right?
Yep.
Like, but jealousy is an emotion like anything else. It will move, it will pass, but it's
Yep.
a big one that has a lot of physiology to it.
It really
Like,
does.
a
And can
lot of
create amazing
physiology.
damage to a relationship if not
Yeah.
managed well.
Yeah,
Right?
it's like this terrible self-fulfilling prophecy
It is.
a lot
Yep.
of times. Like,
Yep.
what people try to do to manage that awful feeling
Yep.
ends up ruining the relationship
Yep.
ultimately, not the thing that we're jealous about. That's not what is the problem. It's like this distraction, though. It's a really potent distraction.
Do you know what I think about sometimes? I'd be curious to know what the two of you think about this, but I just think about, secure attachment, insecure attachment. And if we are in a relationship and we're feeling insecure,
Yep.
how do we even figure out, is that me or is that you? Like, am I a secure person for the most part, but there's something about this relationship that makes me feel very insecure
Yes.
versus I'm insecure in every single relationship that I'm in, and this person has given me absolutely no reason to doubt
Yes.
him or her or them, yet here I am feeling all the same feelings, that self-fulfilling prophecy.
Absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
what I think about that is absolutely, I mean, right on, because what people have to do in those situations, I do believe you should listen to yourself. And I think it's okay to talk about that experience with your person or persons, no matter what the circumstance are, because being transparent about those feelings and getting some kind of, and this is where it's really critical to going back to your question, like, is it you or is it somebody else?
Yeah.
If your person or persons in your life can respond to that and acknowledge that, I know what's going on for you. I'm sorry you're feeling that way. That is not accurate. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not, and give that affirmation.
That's
It's
right.
okay to need that affirmation
Hmm.
and ask for what you need. I have a number of clients that I've worked with where there's some insecurity based on trauma or abuse or developmental things, like you said, the things that we need from our childhood in terms of unconditional love and regard and support. If we don't get that, we're probably going to look for them in maladaptive ways. And so if you can
And not
ask,
even realize that we're
not
doing
even
it
realize it, and
because
if
it
you
feels really real and true,
of course it
right?
does.
In
And
that
it's okay to
moment.
check it out. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to talk to your person in your life or persons again and just kind of check it out, because I think that's where you get to the bottom line,
Yeah.
That's right.
right?
Yeah.
But if there's that pervasive pattern where you're always wanting to control the person you're with, and every relationship has been destroyed due to the self-fulfilling prophecy where your jealousy turns ugly and that turns off the person you're with and you got to move forward, right?
Yeah.
I
Absolutely.
love what you said too, Angela. The reality is jealousy is temporary. Like any other human
Yeah.
emotion, it doesn't last very long. But if you cannot manage that emotion when it comes up and regulate that emotion, there's
That's
so many
right.
ways that I might talk about that.
Yeah.
But Regulating it is going to help you, but there's, oh boy.
It's really one of the most destructive
It really
emotions.
is.
The
Absolutely.
reactions
Yeah,
to it
it's the
is one of the
reactions.
most destructive emotions.
Yeah.
But I love when you asked in there, like, how do I know if it's me?
Yeah.
Right? Because we often think about jealousy as this like god awful thing we want to avoid because it feels so terrible.
Right.
Yeah.
But there are different kinds of jealousy. And one of the ways that that can be referred to is like rational jealousy and irrational jealousy. So one of the best things that we can do when we feel jealousy is just to slow the fuck down.
Yeah.
Like, we do not immediately assume that our reaction is true
Yeah.
or accurate. But we also don't like completely dismiss it and say that it's completely wrong or bad or judge it or whatever. Slow down. Like, this is a red flag. It's telling us something. It's actually really like, what's so tricky about it is that it wants us to look at the flag and say the flag is the problem, but it's actually a beautiful gift. I know it's such a fucked up therapist thing to say. I hear myself.
It's
but it's an opportunity. Yes. So
Abundance.
they look below. Like, there's something really important that does deserve to be tended to
That's right.
going on below.
Yeah.
And that might be, if it's rational jealousy, that might actually be your own body alarm saying, like, something here is off for real, for real.
Yeah.
Like, something is trespassing a boundary of my own and it doesn't feel good. And we want to listen to
That's
that.
right.
Like, that is an important thing to interrogate. And there's so many nuances in relationships of all kinds that can be hard to suss out sometimes. Like, this is a place where it can be valuable to like get feedback from somebody who does their own healing work, ideally,
Yeah.
or like take to therapy or something like that to help, because like this is really confusing for everybody. Like, even therapists who like know this stuff, like
Absolutely.
when all of our shit's collapsed into like one big ball, it's really hard to pull all the threads apart and really understand what's going on. That's just a human experience.
Well,
it's
and I
not
think-
something wrong with you.
Oftentimes with jealousy and rage, right, that feel so like we feel so righteous in our ability to like feel the feelings, which also often I think we point to other people that are
Yes.
making us feel
Yes.
that way.
Yeah.
And I
Blame.
think what
Here
you're
comes
saying,
blame.
right,
Mhm.
is that is a opportunity to kind of dig deep, because usually what happens beneath the surface of those visceral like gut punch feelings is there's a lot of really tender, vulnerable, soft stuff in there that we
Yeah.
need to sit with to figure out like what are the boundaries or what is upsetting about this
Right.
to me. And
Totally.
You know, the interesting thing about, acknowledging that this is a very human experience, it's why I always say it's okay to acknowledge that, and it is okay to communicate that feeling, which has, at some point has to be expressed in some way. But the other thing I tell people is that, whether it's jealousy, whether it's grief, whether it's anger, whether it's whatever, I tell people oftentimes just lay on the bed and let those, and know where that feeling is in your body, and just start breathing and acknowledge it, because it will not kill you.
I love that, Doug.
Well, and eventually it goes away, because there is that mind-body connection, right? And so if you can just say, I feel this way right now, I'm going to sit in bed and just let some breathing happen. Breathing being really important, because I think jealousy oftentimes entails no more breathing, right?
Oh,
Yeah,
God, yeah.
sure.
Like shallow breathing. I will have
Sure.
so many people in my office. I'm like, okay, take a breath, because I don't think you're breathing.
Right, I tell that to I'm like, I feel like you're 3 shallow breaths
I
away
know.
from a panic attack right now. I mean, like, let's just
Right?
get back
And
into
jealousy
the
is
deep.
hard. It's painful.
Totally. It brings out our like big, I would use the word righteous, like our big righteous, defensive, blaming
That's
teenage
right.
parts. Like, here they come, like
You
big
did
and
this
loud.
to
You
me.
did this to me. Yeah.
Well, and the other piece
exactly.
that's
Like,
interesting about the example I gave before, I remember saying, I can tell you where I was in that bar where I said, "That's mine."
That's mine.
and
Not
again,
even like the human.
It was,
like
I know
ass.
that's mine, right? It was so objectifying, right? And then, his friends were like,
Primal.
his friends were so like, oh my God, that's so fucking hot for him to stand up for you. And I felt, here's the thing about it though, I felt icky afterwards.
Right.
Like when we react to that and we
Yeah.
don't necessarily do it in a thoughtful way, we don't feel good about it.
Yeah.
We're not
That's
showing
right.
up the way that we want to
That's
show
So I
right.
remember walking down from the saloon in Minneapolis and being like, yeah, that wasn't good.
Yeah.
I don't like how I felt. I don't like how I did that. I don't like that,
Yeah.
I looked
It's
like a
really only
barbarian.
hot when it's consensual.
Yeah. Which
Well,
my partner
but-
at the time did not mind it, I don't think. I mean, I think he kind of liked being
possessed,
I was going to say possessed. I don't know if that's the...
objectified.
But again, like that is like that's where like all of the nuances of this is so important because
Yeah.
we can say the same words,
Yeah.
but they are coming from a different place, a different part, a different meaning, a different tone.
That's
Like
right.
that tone did not feel good to you. It felt
Yeah.
out of control.
It was out of
visceral, and it wasn't the like hot, kinky, I'm claiming you power dynamic thing
That's
in
right.
the way that it was coming from you. Could we change the tone and be grounded in ourselves and say the same thing, maybe even with the same like visceral raw to
Yeah,
it?
right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's a totally different experience.
Yeah.
But we know when and where it's coming from because we feel that. We feel that.
Can I throw out a random example, like a question?
Yeah.
And maybe like
I believe you can.
I'm going to.
I
Thank
feel like you are.
Mutual, like
This is your
consensual.
podcast with me, so you can do what you want with it because we're not fine.
So but we're trying to be fine every day.
Are
We're
we?
getting a little more, I don't know, we're trying to
I don't
be
always need-
thriving. We could skip
I just want to
fine
let
and just
myself not be fine
thriving.
sometimes. And then sit on my bed and take some deep breaths.
I love that.
I know that I'm sorry I interrupted you. What did you...
So this is what I'm picturing with like maybe one of a million examples, right? But so let's say you're in a situation where you and your primary partner have decided you want to open up the relationship and you have both agreed you feel good about this in theory. And so
It's fine.
right? Right? And then someone is now joining us and there is much more of a connection with one than the other. And maybe I don't know that, well, like, how would you navigate a scenario where practice feels much different than the fantasy that you had and it isn't feeling good, or you feel left out, or you feel like, oh my God, the love of my life is like really connecting and they're having the time of their lives, but I'm not able to dig into any sort of compersion here. Tell us a little, like, so what do you do in that situation?
Yeah. Well, so in general, with jealousy, we tend to think that there are like three options and ways to go with jealousy. There's a critical fourth one that's often missed, but the first way that it sometimes shows up. So, okay, so you described a scenario where it's a couple, they bring in a third, it's going to be so great because everything's going to be really equal, so we're not going to have any hard feelings. And then it's not equal. Like somebody feels different and there's more of a connection maybe, or maybe somebody actually like thought they were going to be into it and then they weren't, or there's a million things that could come up in there, right? So what do we do? The first thing that people, or one of the things that people often do, is they try to like really bring it back to themselves. Like maybe they know some stuff about jealousy and they try to like, they're like, okay, I'm not the boss of my partner. Like I'm not supposed to take my stuff out on them. So I'm going to like squash it down and like suffer in silence. Though,
oh, not so great.
Is not
Suffer in silence,
actually
not so
like, but short term, it may give you some positive outcomes because
A
your
little fake it
partner,
till you make it.
yeah, because your partner is getting to continue to do something that they want to be doing that feels good. You're showing up like this supportive partner, and like that seems on the surface like maybe it's a good tactic to take, but that is something that if it really isn't yours and it really doesn't feel good and we don't talk about it in any way, shape, or form, then that is going to build resentment. And resentment is one of the worst things that relationships can have. Like it will kill a relationship.
It will kill a relationship.
It
In
does.
fact, when I do relationship work, I oftentimes the first homework assignment will be make a list of all your resentments that are unresolved, that have not been adequately addressed in your relationship. And everyone laughs and says, "I'll get 3 notebooks." And I'm like, okay,
absolutely.
because
we'll be here a while.
Absolutely.
I know we
will.
And my favorite definition, it's my favorite with my therapist hat on. I fucking hate it with my like Angela person hat on. But my favorite definition of resentment, Pia Melody, says that it's victim anger, and that we are very rarely actually victims.
That's really powerful.
Very
is
clear
powerful,
when we're a victim, like we're attacked on the street or something, then obviously like we are a victim, like we are not contributing to our own harm in that sort of way. But a lot of times we put ourselves into the victim position by doing things that we know we don't want to do.
Right.
And then we get real resentful. and we blame the other person.
That's right. And I'm like picturing this exact same scenario that what happens, I'm imagining what happens a lot with the couples I talk to is if you are swallowing down this horrible feeling and your partner doesn't notice.
That's right.
And they keep doing whatever it is they're doing,
That's right.
that is even more resentment, right? Because you haven't
right.
spoken up and they're having the time of their lives and they're not noticing that you're not happy.
right.
So it makes us feel.
Yes.
Or
And
they-
then we're like big in our story, right?
Absolutely.
Like, they should know. Obviously they know. They could
should
read me.
intuit.
We're so like close, or like I'm giving out these little passive aggressive hints, don't they?
So
like,
that's it, right?
you know,
Right.
right? Like it's so many ways. And it can be hard to identify this one in some ways because
Yeah.
it can be like, no, I'm just trying to be the good partner. I'm trying to be responsible for my own stuff and not put it on my partner. But like inadvertently, that is exactly what we're ending up doing.
Yeah.
And long term, that is a recipe for disaster. So that's one way
Yep.
that we might handle jealousy initially. Another way is going to come with immediate rule.
Okay.
That didn't feel good. It's not on the table anymore.
But is this after the experience or during?
Maybe both,
Okay.
but either way,
Yep.
it might be like, nope,
Nope.
like
I don't like it.
I thought that was going to be okay, but nope, it's not. So now we have a rule: you're not allowed.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
that control, that illusion of control, right? Like can calm us down for a second, but it's not relational, and it's not like taking anybody else's feelings or experience into consideration either. And it's oftentimes really unrealistic to maintain those kinds of rules without there being some significant harm somewhere else. So it doesn't actually get to the heart of the matter either. It's like
That's right.
believing what that red flag said was true at the
Yep.
top instead of looking underneath for what's really under there. So we go to rules, we go to veto power is a big one that's often talked about.
Yep.
Like I can say like a unilateral no to something, and it's nuanced, right? Because it's not that you have to agree to everything. That's not what we're saying. It's about the tone, the where is it coming from,
That's right.
the nuance of all of
Well,
it.
because
in
I
there.
can picture a scenario that if the person feeling bad or left out comes to the table and says, you guys, I really thought I was going to be okay with this. I want to be okay with this, but I think I'm beyond my capacity
Yep.
to accept that this is what's happening. I'm all sorts of in my feels right now. And like, I'm owning that I said that this would be okay, but it's really not feeling okay. I feel like that's maybe a better way to approach
Yes.
that conversation,
Yes.
even in the moment.
Spoiler alert, you're going to the one that people don't often consider, actually.
Option 3.
Option 4.
Oh,
So
option
option 3 is break up,
Yep.
right? We're not compatible. This doesn't work. Like,
Right.
clearly this doesn't work. We don't want the same thing. So we shouldn't be together.
That feels so premature. But yeah, if the
Yes.
red flag is big enough and if you're not looking at your own shit, then option 3 feels
Yeah.
like the only
Well, and
option.
I think that's the critical thing. It feels, right? Like, I
Yep.
want this feeling to end.
Yep.
What can I do? Break up.
Yeah. You know, and it's interesting because one of the things that we're going to talk about here is when you communicate something like this doesn't work for me and you can kind of go to that rule oriented place, the question is if the other person agrees with you versus disagrees with you.
Right.
Like, what do you do in the case?
Right.
Like, do the two of you, and I would say,
Right.
of course, based on everything we've talked about thus far, the important part is to continue that communication and to continue to have negotiation toward a compromise, right?
Yep.
But the real issue is, and this is where maybe that option comes in of breaking up, is when you cannot reach consensus,
That's right.
when you just do not want the same things anymore.
That's right.
Right.
But that is really different
Yep.
than the knee
It
jerk
is. That's
breakup,
correct. Yep,
right?
absolutely
Just like
it
we talked
is.
about before with the like, that's mine.
Yep.
That would be the knee jerk breakup.
Right.
Like,
So proud of that.
get out, right?
Yeah,
We've
no,
all
I
got
think
one.
we should.
We've all
Yeah,
got
yeah.
We all
one.
can relate.
It's
Yes.
so gross.
Yes.
right?
It feels gross.
Yeah.
If you're healthy,
And it is
generally
appropriate to
feels
say,
gross.
you know, it was that instead
That.
of he.
That's
like it was.
mine. That ass that may or may not be attached to that human is mine.
Hmm? I mean, I don't know that there's a person on the earth that hasn't had that literal response, actually,
that's right.
at some point, internally or externally.
That's right.
They may not have had an audience for it like you did, but like it's it's happening. Like that is a universal experience for
And so
sure.
option 4,
So option 4 is the one that people often don't even consider,
right.
actually. Like there is another option. You don't
Speaking
have
your
to just
truth.
like swallow it and have it all be on you.
Yep.
You don't have to like make a rule to try to control it externally. And you don't have to end the relationship as any of those 3 as a knee-jerk reaction. There is this next step where you come in and do exactly what you named. Like that was a perfect example of like owning your own experience of it.
Yep.
I did not hear any of the like, you did this, or like because you were da 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 da, you made me feel da da da. You said, whoa, like I thought this was going to be okay. Maybe I even want it to be
That's right.
okay. But the reality of this present moment is that it doesn't feel okay. And then what, right? Then it often helps to have maybe some kind of ask to go with that. Even
Yep.
like there might be an ask for the moment of like, can we take a break for a minute? Like, can we all just like have some fresh air,
Yeah.
get a drink of water, just like step away for a minute.
Regulate our nervous system.
Regulate
and
our nervous
Yeah,
system. Exactly.
100%.
With the super basics, right? Like that is not the moment to get into the big long-term conversation about this. That is the moment to just pause.
The other thing that I would say, and let's talk about substances for a second.
Yes.
Minnesota just legalized
Yes.
marijuana, but I would encourage everybody to be sober when they have those conversations. And
Absolutely.
It's really easy to go into a slippery slope and have a conversation when you've been having a couple cocktails or feeling a
Absolutely.
little bit more courageous to say what you
Yes.
want to say with the assistance of a substance and slippery slope.
Which
Yes.
And that's not the
escalates
time.
things.
Ooh,
No
it can escalate.
problem.
Yep.
Yes.
In a big way.
Yes.
Yep.
I mean, it's nuanced, right? Like
is.
sometimes a drink can be helpful to say that scary thing
I agree.
that you can't bring yourself to say. But again, with the nuance, where's the tipping point
Yeah.
from, okay, you just took the edge
Yeah.
off that anxiety versus like, I'm really not actually in control of all of my faculties
That's right.
and like actually able to ethically consent to what's going to come next.
Oh, 100%. I mean, would this feel like a good segue into just the question of consensus in general? Like, how do people even, like, if you're talking like to 3 different people or 4 different people, how do you even ask for the things that you want or agree on the things that you want? It's already hard enough to negotiate this with 2 people.
Absolutely. And that's where I come back to saying like it's a lot of work, right? Like
Yep.
it is
Sure is.
people picture like polyamory is basically just like one big orgy. And like it can be in like a moment in time,
That's right.
but like probably that orgy, like well done, took like 42 hours of communication between 8 different people that in ways that are like not the sexy dream that you have in your head. Like that's just the reality of being a person. If you want to
Yes.
have like ongoing connection in
Yeah.
particular with somebody else, if you're just looking for like a one night something, then like you don't have to do all that in the
Right.
same way. Like there are other things you should
Contract.
negotiate, but like it's different. You don't have to go to these deep levels in the same way. And so like that becomes really critical. And it's just, it is a lot of like, can I hold my own feelings about
Yep,
all of
that's
this,
right.
right?
Yeah.
Because you're not going to get everything that you want. And there may be a lot of times this happens in monogamy too. It's just that there's more opportunity for it the more people you add in. And so, yeah, just like it might be hard, it might be a lot easier to choose a restaurant with one friend that you're meeting up
That's right.
with.
Yep.
And even that can be tricky sometimes,
Yep.
right? Like, but if you're adding 6 people, like that's a lot more negotiation in different ways. And so, how do I handle disappointment? Disappointment's a real hot button emotion for people too. People get really reactive about disappointment in
Absolutely.
ways that are way old, usually. Like
That's what I
they're
was
the
going to say.
very
If you
developmental
hear your
trauma.
parent is disappointed, it's a wound.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
you don't want to disappoint
yeah.
the people who you need love from and
Yes.
you need care from on a
Yes.
consistent basis. So you're
People
absolutely
who
right.
are shame based and like
Yeah.
fall to shame as a like norm
Yeah.
can really get themselves in trouble
Like
in
triggered.
in relationships with multiple people because you can't people please at that level.
That's right.
You know, like it's hurtful and harmful enough in a one-on-one sort of way. But when you're trying to do that with multiple people, like it crashes and burns really quickly. And so, yeah, like how do we like sit in our feelings of like, oh wow, I really wanted that, but I can't have it.
Which I
And
think is like I think about every couple I've ever talked to, and
Yeah.
even just the idea that you can't always get what you're asking for is really hard
totally.
on some basic level, because
Yeah.
there is again that feeling of like, but I want this thing,
Mhm.
and if someone isn't comfortable with it,
Yeah.
And lots of things bring up all of our attachment shit.
Oh my
And
God,
like it's like
absolutely.
it doesn't become this want, it becomes a need at this visceral level. Like we might feel like we're gonna die if we don't get it. Like we might really feel that way. That's real.
Absolutely.
And we that's not how it works. Like we are not entitled to somebody else's time, to their body, to their attention, like any of those
That's
things.
right.
Like it starts with ourself,
Yeah.
and then we can branch off from there. And so there is a lot of important stuff to negotiate. And the beauty on the flip side, you know, we're talking about a lot of the hard stuff here.
Right.
The flip side is that in the context of an open relationship, we also have some opportunities to get more of our needs met potentially when there's this like, I mean, if we go back to like personal experience stuff, I was like so fucking excited that that my wife's girlfriend loved scary movies because I
oh
hate
my God,
being
yes.
scared
Yeah.
and scary movies, and she lived for it, and I always felt kind of bad that I wouldn't do it with her because I can't, like I really can't. But I was like, fuck yes,
Like you
like
found
go
great
Yeah.
relief.
live your best
Oh my
life,
God,
like have so much fun. How can I support this? You know,
It goes to that
like
proverbial sort of statement that, you know, we can't be one thing, we can't be
That's
everything
right.
to one
That's
person.
right.
And so we have
That's
to find
right.
those things sometimes outside of the relationship.
Yes.
And obviously we're talking about a different sort of loving relationship when we talk about polyamory, but a lot of people look at their friends to get some
That's
of those
right.
things met as well.
Absolutely.
Which
It's
is healthy.
normal in
It
our
is normal.
we
Absolutely.
understand that
We do,
concept, and
because
it's
there's
normal in our
yeah,
friend world. Like,
you're not
yeah, I have a
kissing
friend
that
that do
person, right?
this, and I do this,
Yeah.
you know, whatever. We can have that in relationship
Yeah,
too.
it's beautiful, and it makes so much sense.
One of the
Yes.
things too that, you know, as we take a look at kind of things we want to cover in this episode, I think sometimes what creates some security in a relationship is when the relationship is public and the relationship is open to families, friends, colleagues. What do you recommend? What have you experienced? And you talked a little bit about this the last episode, but how do people come
Yeah.
out to those people, and how do you do that?
It's really complex, to be honest, because there's kind of like the side where we talk about our feelings
Yeah.
about it all.
Yep.
And then there's the side where we talk about legalities of it all. And I
Yeah.
really want to put some focus on the legalities of it all, because I think like if you have not had an identity that has required you to be hidden in some sort of way, or that it is not protected in some sort of way legally, then you may be really oblivious to even the thought of this.
That's right.
Like it is, which is a privilege in and of itself. But I find a lot that straight people in particular, like they just haven't had to think about this before. And so, like, can miss some of the nuances of this
Yeah.
without like being fear mongering in any way. I think it is really important for people to know that polyamory or relationships with multiple people, they're not a protected class in any way in terms of discrimination, especially around like the workplace. So you can be fired if your boss or people at your job know that you are in a relationship with multiple people,
What?
even as consenting adults. It's not illegal. I mean, legal marriage to more than one person is not legal, but spiritual marriage, or not even marriage, just relationships with multiple people is not technically illegal, but it's also not protected. And there is a lot of stigma and judgment and assumptions about any sort of like identity outside of like straight monogamy. There is a creepy like focus on sex and like obsession almost on sex. And there is precedent that people have lost custody of children for being out and open about having multiple partners, because the other parent thinks that's like depraved or unsafe for children in some sort of way. Like, this does actually happen. There are a lot of people who are working on this, fighting this. There's a lot of activism around this. There has now been a few cases where, like, there are three parents on an adoption certificate, which is very rare, but it's like starting to happen.
Right.
There are lawyers who specialize in helping folks set up, like, how do you set up a will? How do you set up, like, who gets to visit you in a hospital? Like, our whole system is set up for monogamous marriage.
That's right.
You get a +1 to an event.
That's
You know,
Yeah.
like, it's so, when you start to, like, notice it and think about it, it's actually really shocking how that constant assumption
Right.
is there.
Well, when you're not in the privileged class, you notice
That's
every
right.
little part of the system that isn't set up for you.
That's right. Because they're coming for you. And, like, LGBTQ people are used to that a little bit more, being aware of that in different ways, but they may also still not know that
Right.
this could be a risk. And, you know, it's not a risk everywhere. Like, I'm not saying that people shouldn't come out, but I am saying that people should do a real risk assessment about their own individual circumstances.
Yeah.
Like, if you work for somebody else, like, what kind of company do you work for? Are there any other people that are out and open in that way? If you co-parent with somebody that you're not married to that might have really different belief systems, like, where does all of that stand? Like, it is important to be strategic about it. It is not like being dramatic or over
Right.
analyzing or something
Because it's
to
not
consider
safe.
the
There's
risk.
a lot of risk in
No.
certain situations.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and Angela, you
Yes.
referenced in the first episode that you did with us that you grew up in rural Minnesota. I did as well, in a very conservative county, maybe the most conservative county that there is in Minnesota. And just that's not a discussion that happens in a very Catholic, parochial sort of
That's
community,
right. That's right.
And so being able to do that for us in the Twin Cities or for any major city in the U.S., it's a much easier process as well. Finding supportive people, finding allies, finding supportive agencies to work for, it's housing options, etc.
Yes.
All of those resources
Yes.
are more available in larger cities.
That's right.
Which is really unfortunate because there's such beauty in rural communities as well. I miss part of it.
Yeah.
I miss the crackling snow of my parents' farm. So,
Yeah,
there's so many
absolutely.
different pieces of this puzzle, but creating that sort of risk assessment
Yes.
is so different for those of us who have some flexibility to do that.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And, then we talk about, like, the feelings aspect of it, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's a plenty of research about what being in the closet about an identity does to a person, and it's not
It makes you
arguable.
sick.
It's awful. Like, it's got terrible detrimental effects on people when we have to hide, like, our authenticity,
Yeah.
especially when we have to, like, we're talking about hiding our love with this topic.
That's right.
Like,
Really, really
hiding
sad.
our love,
Which is who we are.
which is who we
It's
are.
the best part of who we are.
That's
I would
right.
argue.
Yes, absolutely.
And what's interesting, Angela, of course, your website and your practice, The Courageous Truth, is such an interesting way. I like what a beautiful
Yeah.
phrase that is. And wouldn't it be great if everyone could have their truth and be free to express that truth
Yes.
without even needing to be courageous?
Yes,
Just be able
absolutely.
to be yourself
Absolutely.
and express who that is in an open way.
Yes. And that was one of the reasons that I chose to be more public and continue to be more public as a self-employed person.
Yeah.
I don't have the risk of work. My
Right.
child's father went on to be polyamorous, so, like, he lives a very out, happy poly life, so I don't
No
have to
judgment
worry
on
about
that.
that over there. So I had a lot of privilege to be
Yeah.
able to be a spokesperson in certain ways, or educating in different ways without that risk. But not everybody has that. And then with feelings, like, obviously there's our own, like, individual impact of not being able to share something, and just even the very important ripple effects that has. Like, you're dating somebody, you're excited about them, this is like a meaningful, lovely experience, and what does your best friend think you did on Friday night? And do you have to like just not talk about it? Do you have to make something up?
It's like falling in love in a vacuum,
Yes,
all alone in a
yes,
small little dark closet where you
yes,
can't share the joy with anyone else.
yes,
That's
absolutely. That has impacts in different ways. For other people, similar kind of risk benefit around feelings too, about like safety and financial support of families in different ways, especially if you're younger and still reliant on that. But then there's other like kind of sneaky things that we don't think about. Like, okay, let's say we decide we're not going to be out for whatever reasons. That's what we've landed on. We're not going to be out. But then we're on a date in the city where we live, which seems really big until you're on a date with somebody that's not your partner. And then
exactly
all of
right.
a sudden, it's
everyone you
tiny.
ever known.
Exactly.
Yep.
And there's this like, what are they going to think? Like, what are we doing on that date? Is it just like, could it just pass as like a coffee with a friend? Or is it a place where like there's some tangible energy or maybe even some like actual PDA happening in some sort of way? And then they're going to think you're cheating.
But then it's like immediately you are sucked out of being able to enjoy that moment with this person because you
Yes.
are worried about what everyone else is thinking
Yes.
about you.
Yes. Which could sound like it's an individual problem, but I would just really want to hold it. That's systemic bullshit or
I agree.
being put on an individual and
Yeah.
making the individual feel like it's theirs
That's right.
when it's not actually, because there really shouldn't be any reason why you can't be out loving, putting like loving energy into the world, having a good time with somebody that you care about, that everybody is consenting around.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is a systemic problem that is being put on individuals, and it's not okay. And it's the reality that we live in right now. Like, what is it? How do you date? A lot of people go on a dating app, right? Like, if you get on dating apps, you will see some people don't have like face pictures in different ways. And it's not just because it's all about the dick. Like,
What?
I know,
I'm
right?
so sorry for everything that I've previously thought and accused you of
Thank you.
in the past.
Thank you.
Will you tell us a little bit? Do I need to keep
No,
apologizing?
you don't need to keep apologizing, nor should you elaborate at the moment.
Oh,
Keep
yeah,
going.
totally. I was like, I've got so much more to say about that, but maybe that will be for later. Question for you. So I feel like you can't even put an umbrella over how the monogamous community, what does that even mean, does breakups. But in my head, I feel like there might be something a little bit more maybe simplistic or like clean cut. It's like the end of this one, mourning, grieving, moving on to the next person.
Yeah.
So like, can you tell us a little bit about how do breakups look potentially? I'm sure it is
Yeah.
so many different
Yeah.
possibilities.
That's exactly it. I mean, there are so many different possibilities. I think, first we have like one kind of breakup might be of that like primary relationship, if there was one, especially if there had been like an established monogamous relationship that then opened up. And if it ends, like if there was an established relationship that stayed monogamous that ended, right? Like people are going to have a mix of feelings depending upon their relationships and what was happening. But generally, you won't get a lot of like, you asked for this. Or this was inevitable. Like you did something to fuck this up, like really clearly.
Yeah.
Like you made a bad choice or something, like, which you may get some of, like people being like, yeah, I'm not surprised, or I'm not, and not have the same like empathy that
Absolutely.
you might get when the breakup of a monogamous relationship
And recognition of
ends.
your grief and your
And
loss.
recognition of your grief and your loss, and this like blaming the wrong thing, right? Like similar with jealous, like we're going to blame the polyamory
That's
for
right.
why it
That's
ends.
right.
Then there's also sort of like what I touched on briefly in the last episode of like, then you're contributing to this like failure narrative that like polyamory can't work.
That's right.
Right.
Which people are
When-
clearly not looking at the statistics around monogamous.
That's the thing that always just blows me away. Like, are you kidding?
Chance.
Like, We all got a lot of shit. It's amazing that relationships last more than 10 minutes, like ever, like monogamous or otherwise. Like it's a pretty damn big deal if we had one for a little while, no matter what kind of it is. Like
I've always joked about my daughter in LA in the film industry. I've always said she should do a show based on marriages or relationships that have a 10-year cap. And then at 10 years, you get to decide what to do.
Like renegotiate the terms.
Renegotiate the terms.
Do I
Either
still
no
like
fault,
you?
no foul. You know, you just kind of walk away without any of the legalities that we put people through in a really horrible way in this culture.
Yes.
Right? And we let people decide.
Yep.
Because there's so many around 10 years that I think really hit that sort of point at which they would make a decision to leave.
I think it's a 7-year.
You think 7?
Let's do
I'm
7
gonna go
years.
10.
I really like the idea of just like
Or 9.
whoever's been together that long.
Yeah.
We all want to see what they decide. Do we throw in
I
some
know.
temptations or like?
I mean, I feel like this is kind of like the ultimatum on Netflix.
Oh,
but
damn it! Someone already came up with it.
it's similar, but not the same. But
I don't know.
yes,
We don't know it.
but what
Maybe.
you're talking about actually
Yeah.
is something really important that, like, in compulsory monogamy that we don't think about or choose.
Yeah.
We assume that that's not happening, but it is.
Mm.
You're choosing to
That's
stay
right.
in that relationship
That's right.
every single day, sometimes every fucking second when you're real mad, right? Like, no, monogamous or otherwise. But polyamory puts that in the open.
Yeah.
Instead of pretending like that doesn't exist and giving us this like false sense of control,
Oh my gosh, yeah.
when it's a false sense of control. And some people can't tolerate that, right? Like they need to be able to like just dissociate from that really and not look at that every day. And monogamy can sometimes give a safe facade of that because it's not seen as quite as active because there's not like another person there like that's actively like ready and able to engage in some sort of way, but it's still happening every day, whether we're naming it or not. It's absolutely happening.
That's fascinating and so true.
I want to go back to, I mean, Talia, you asked the question about like a breakup and whatnot,
Yes.
and how to navigate that.
Yes.
And, you know, people are going to respond differently. And I always want to remind people that people have a hard time acknowledging loss for people. They don't know what to say.
Yeah.
I've had people tell me that, you know, some really interesting responses to people losing a loved one and whatnot that just are a little bit harsh.
Yeah.
God's will does not work very well for a lot of people. So,
Yeah.
you know, that's one of the things. But I'm more curious, when you establish a relationship where there is a primary and secondary,
Yes.
and we call that a metamor, is that right?
Yep.
You know, and how does the primary person who's not in that relationship communicate with that person? Right?
Yeah.
I want to know so much more.
I know.
What are your
It's like,
thoughts?
it's really complex,
Like, it's like,
right?
yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
absolutely. I mean, I that's what I wanted to really circle back to, like that unique, different sort of position and loss. Because first of all, like again, if like a secondary relationship ends,
Yeah.
first of all, like, are we out or not out about that?
Yeah.
Right. So if like we're not out about that, then we're really suffering alone with no recognition of that relationship. And it may be really confusing to people around us. It could be, you might need time off of work or something, or you're just not yourself because you're grieving,
Right.
you know?
Right.
And it's that ambiguous loss that like isn't recognized. And that's really painful. It just kind of piles on all of the other ways that we're not attuned to and affirmed in those sorts of ways.
Right.
Then if we are out, we may also get some of the same stuff we got in the first, like with like, well, it was never going to work anyway, or like, was this, but it's not, but you have the other person, or like, you know, just things that they do not understand the depth and importance of that relationship. And then you have the dynamic of, well, that was maybe between me and you, but you two have your own relationship that's separate or different.
And maybe they weren't ready to part ways.
And they were maybe not ready to part ways. And so again, that's another place for negotiation. Like, what is the meaning that I make? Because that's where the like, right? Because I think the risk there is like, if you broke up with me and then you're talking to my partner, or my partner's talking to the person that broke up with me,
That's right.
that's ripe for making stories about what that means,
I
right?
love
Like,
that narrative of like the way that you
really,
describe that, of like
Right.
the making stories.
oh yeah, like that might, like my partner loves them more, or they're not loyal, or they're disrespectful, or so many different ways that that could go, because I'm really centering my, like, no differentiation, like you're saying, like what my partner does directly reflects on me in some sort of way, and it gets really, really complex. There's also the, like, that primary person then is with a partner who's grieving, and how do we be a supportive partner to our partner that's grieving somebody else?
Which
What
also
does,
might make one feel a little jealous and insecure. I'm imagining,
yep,
like,
could
well,
make,
I'm right here,
yep,
and why are you so sad about this person? Would
yep,
you be that sad about me?
right. And when we're grieving, like, I mean, everybody's different, but I think more often than not, we don't feel a lot of sexual desire usually, or there might be low energy. Like, we're not gonna be like ready to be like our normal, like, social or sexual selves usually. Like, we need a minute,
Right.
and that also then, but then that relationship is carrying some of that weight and impact of that, and somebody may have to wait for a while to have sex with their partner, for example,
Yeah, of
which
course.
is
Yep.
complex,
Yep.
right? Like, really complex. So there's just so many layers to that become really complex and just aren't seen and understood very well.
Oh my God, Angela, you are so remarkable. I mean, just in terms of like the work that you're doing and the way that you're conceptualizing these really complicated things. And I feel like you have so much compassion and empathy for everyone in every position in all of these scenarios of loving. Like, it's hard to be a person, and it's hard to love, and it's hard to lose. And I mean,
And it's hard to be jealous, and it's all those things that we're
Yeah.
talking
all
about.
those
Yeah.
things.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Absolutely.
this was so, I mean, mind blown again. I just feel like it's such an interesting topic that I had no idea. I didn't even know the questions to ask. And so
Yeah.
this was just
Yeah.
incredibly informative.
It
Yeah.
always is.
It's there's so much.
And will
There's so
you
much.
plug yourself again
Yes.
and tell us, like, where can people find you?
Yeah, the best way to find me is my website, which is thecourageoustruth.com. And I do individual therapy and individual and relational coaching in different forms, and specialize in helping people navigate non monogamy in that relational
I'm
practice.
also just thrilled to now know you and have a resource in the
Absolutely.
community. And
Mhm.
I was just going to say, there's no question that this conversation could keep going in a number of different directions and has
Yes.
different avenues. Even
Yes.
as you and I consulted that first time on coming to the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't even really talk about sex.
I know we did not talk about sex, and so sex becomes something. And by the way, you referenced kink at
Yeah.
some point, and I want to
Yeah.
talk about those communities, how to feel unashamed, and how to explore those things
Absolutely.
safely and consensually.
Absolutely.
And we have a vibrant kink community across the U.S. in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to talk about that next too. So that's kind of a bit of a teaser for all of you, and we'd love to have you back.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'd
Angela, you
love to
speak
come
so
back.
compassionately about, as you said before, any part of any relationship. You have an intelligent way of looking at things that I think makes sense to probably everyone who works with you. So thank you so much for being with us today. Your
so
pleasure.
so
grateful.
much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
So grateful.
It's my pleasure.
And thank you, everybody, for tuning in and hopping on. And we hope that you got some value out of this, because I know that
That we did.
we did. So love y'all, and we will see you next time.
See you soon.
Bye.